In the Bible, almost every life ends the same way. And then he died. But one man's story ends very differently. He walked with God, and then he was gone. No death, no explanation. So what really happened to Enoch? Genesis chapter 5 reads like a family record, tracing the generations from Adam all the way to Noah. In this long list, each name follows the same pattern. A man is born, he lives a certain number of years, he has children, and eventually his life ends. Enoch's name appears seventh in this sequence, right after his father Jared and before his son Methuselah. That position isn't just a number. It puts Enoch right in the heart of the story that stretches from the very first human to the world-changing flood. The genealogy starts with Adam, who lived 930 years. Seth, Enoch, Kenan, Mahalalel, and Jared each followed, living for centuries and fathering sons and daughters. Then comes Enoch. According to Genesis chapter 5 verse 21, Enoch became the father of Methuselah at 65 years old. While most of his ancestors had children at older ages, Enoch's story moves quickly. He stands out not just for his place in the list, but for what happens next. Methuselah, Enoch's son, would go on to live the longest recorded life in the Bible, 969 years. Enoch's own lifespan, by contrast, is much shorter, just 365 years. But it is not the length of his life that draws attention. It is the way his story is told. The text makes it clear. Enoch is firmly rooted in the same family line as Adam, Seth, and Noah, yet something about his account is about to break the mold. Why does Enoch's entry feel so different from the others? That question lingers as the genealogy unfolds. Jared stands as Enoch's father in the ancient record, living 962 years and continuing the long line begun with Adam. Enoch's arrival in this family is precise. Genesis says Jared was 162 years old when Enoch was born. Decades later, at just 65, Enoch became the father of Methuselah, a name that would become famous for its staggering lifespan. Methuselah's years would stretch to 969, the longest of anyone in the genealogy. But Enoch's own span is much shorter. The text gives him 365 years, a number that stands out sharply among lifespans that routinely push past 800 or 900. Yet, even with these numbers, Enoch's account remains tightly woven into the same thread that runs from Adam to Noah. This family line is unbroken. Adam, Seth, Enoch, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and finally Noah. Each generation passes the story forward, each name a link in the chain leading up to the flood. Still, something about Enoch refuses to blend in. The pattern of long life and eventual death is suddenly interrupted. The details are clear, but the narrative takes an unexpected turn. There is something very unusual about his story. Genesis 5 verse 24 reads, "Enoch walked with God, then he was no more because God took him." This single verse stands out for its simplicity and depth, and each phrase carries its own weight. First, the words Enoch walked with God describe a relationship that goes beyond following rules or offering sacrifices. In the Hebrew, the verb for walked suggests a steady, ongoing companionship, a life lived closely alongside God day after day. The text does not say Enoch was perfect, but it does make clear that his life moved in step with God's ways for a remarkable span of time. Next comes the phrase, "then he was no more." The Hebrew here simply says, "and he was not." It is a sudden break in the pattern. For every other patriarch, the genealogy ends with, "and then he died." But here, Enoch's presence just stops. The text leaves no record of death, burial, or even age at death, just the statement that he was gone. The final phrase, "because God took him," uses the Hebrew verb lakach. This word means to take, receive, or carry away. In other parts of the Bible, lakach can refer to taking something by hand, or to God removing someone from the world. The ancient Greek translation, the Septuagint, supports this reading by using verbs that mean to take away or to place elsewhere. These choices underline that the action is God's alone, a purposeful removal, not a natural death. The text also tells us that Enoch's walk with God lasted 300 years after the birth of Methuselah. That is not a brief moment, but a lifetime of close fellowship. What does that actually mean? Every entry in Genesis 5 ends the same way: a name, a lifespan, and the words, "and then he died." Adam, Seth, Enoch, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Methuselah, and Lamech, each one follows this pattern, closing their story with the finality of death. This repeated formula is no accident. It is like a drumbeat, reminding readers that even the longest life eventually reaches the same end. But when the list arrives at Enoch, the rhythm breaks. There is no mention of death. Instead, the text simply says that Enoch was no more because God took him. This break in the pattern is not just a quirk. In ancient writing, repetition sets expectations, and any exception stands out on purpose. By changing the formula for Enoch, the writer signals that something unique has happened. Enoch is not just another name in a family tree. His story is meant to draw attention. The language used for Enoch's departure is different from everyone else. The usual word for death, mavet, is missing. Instead, the Hebrew uses lakach, meaning to take or to carry away. The Greek translation, the Septuagint, echoes this with verbs like to take away or to place elsewhere. The text wants readers to notice that Enoch's end is not the result of natural causes, but of divine action. This kind of removal appears only once more in the Hebrew scriptures, the story of Elijah in 2 Kings chapter 2. Elijah is not said to die, but is taken up by a whirlwind into heaven. Like Enoch, Elijah's story skips the standard death formula and replaces it with a description of being taken away by God. These two stories stand alone in the Old Testament, each one marked by the absence of death and the presence of God's direct intervention. Enoch's account is not a random break in the text. It is a deliberate signal. The pattern of death is interrupted to highlight a life that stands apart. But Enoch's story does not end in Genesis. Hebrews 11 verse 5 looks back at Enoch's story and draws out its deepest meaning. By faith, Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found because God had taken him. The writer of Hebrews places Enoch in a long line of people remembered for their faith, not for their achievements or long lives. Here, Enoch's removal is not a puzzle or a trick. It is described as the result of a life marked by trust in God. Enoch did not experience death, the verse says, because God took him away. His story stands as one of the Bible's clearest examples of what it means to live by faith. Jude verses 14 and 15 add another layer. Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied, saying, "Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment on all." In this short letter, Enoch is remembered not just as a man of faith, but as a prophet. Jude uses Enoch's words to warn about coming judgment, showing that Enoch's life and message carried weight far beyond his own time. Taken together, these New Testament passages treat Enoch as both a model of faith and a voice for God. Mainstream Christian interpretation keeps the focus on these biblical texts, not on later legends or apocryphal writings. Enoch's story is seen as a signpost pointing to the power of faith and the reality of God's promise. So why is his story so important? Walking with God isn't about dramatic visions or secret knowledge. In the story of Enoch, it simply means living each day in steady trust and honest obedience. Enoch's life shows a pattern, a person choosing to stay close to God, not just in big moments, but in the ordinary routines of life. That kind of walk can look like setting aside time each morning to pray, or letting kindness and integrity shape decisions at work and at home. It's not about escaping daily struggles or reaching some mystical state.
Enoch's example points to relationship, not retreat. It points to a life where faith becomes a habit and God's presence shapes everyday priorities. The Bible's focus stays on this quiet, ongoing friendship. What if one short life could model a whole calling? Enoch's story stands as a rare break in the biblical pattern, a reminder that faith and closeness with God still raise real questions today. In a world searching for meaning, His mystery endures. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe.